Okay, moving on. My trip to Oshkosh with Richard Ewing and Delia Parker, was an enjoyable couple of weeks. We had probably as much fun as anyone could have. The route to Oshkosh was from Perth to Sydney. We had to leave late out of Perth because of a tailwind. We didn't want to get into Sydney too early, and so at 12:30, it was due to leave at midnight, and we were still sitting on the ground at 12:30, 1:15, and we still arrived there right on 6 o'clock in the morning. So it was less than 3.5 hours to Sydney, which was a rocket run. 15 hours across the Pacific, and I inquired and we'd flown in the Charles Owen. So that took me back in history, because Charles Owen was flying across the Pacific when he got lost on his way to Hawaii. So I gave him a moment's thought. Los Angeles, and then across America in one of those packed aeroplanes that Steve talked about, to Chicago. And it was in Chicago that Richard and Delia and I arrived within an hour of each other, all coming from slightly different directions, different aircraft. Delia had been in Canada for a few weeks, a couple of weeks, and so we were all pretty happy to get together. And what we did from Chicago was head southeast to Dayton, and we pretty much did what Steve did, so I won't cover any of that in any detail. We went to the US Air Force Museum. Delia and I tacked on to a guided tour which took us from the inception of aviation, the Wright brothers, up to the end of World War II. That's the museum for very large arrangements, and there's an outside display as well. The car park was absolutely chock-a-block full. Down here and around the corner. In fact, I would estimate there would have been 500 cars there. There was a reason for it, because the Dayton Air Show was on that weekend as well, and we got there on the Friday beforehand. So that was what we saw within the museum: the Wright brothers flyer replica, the track leading out from it, the way they got it airborne. And this is the boxcar, the B-29 that dropped the Fat Man bomb on Nagasaki. And there was a rare Ju-52 there which attracted my attention, so I had a good look at that and took a photograph of it. But there was plenty more to see and plenty more to do. Then we headed for Huffman Prairie, which Steve has already mentioned. I saw the sign and said to Delia and Richard, "We've got to go there," and they said, "What's there?" And I said, "Well, it's the home of aviation. That's where the Wright brothers really learned how to fly." After their initial success, where they flew 100 metres in 59 seconds at Kitty Hawk, they brought their wreck back to Huffman Prairie, reassembled it, made some changes, and this is where they learned to fly in circles. They learned to take off and land, climb and descend. Not only flying circles, but they were flying figure eights. And this was happening at a time when other people in the world were very happy to take off and progress about 10, 20 metres and land again in a straight line, and the Wright brothers were really moving ahead. So this Huffman Prairie is the cradle of aviation as far as I'm concerned. So that's Richard standing up against a replica of the launch mechanism, and that's the weight that Steve mentioned, which they'd drop, and through a system of pulleys the Wright flyer would take off down that track 60 feet long. On the image there, you might be able to see over there the tail of an aircraft at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This building is a replica of what the Wright brothers worked in while they, over 2 years, 1904 and 5, worked on the development of the Wright flyer to make it a flyable piece of gear. There are flags going right around the perimeter of the field to show you the path that the Wright brothers flew. Probably, I'd guess, half a mile, kilometre, something like that, would have been the circuits they were making around the park, around the field. That's what the field was like in the days of the Wright brothers. In fact, that little message that's up there is indicating the Wright Flyer in the background. So they had not only the principles of flight to contend with, had to contend with a few cattle roaming around the field as well. And so that's it, the cradle of aviation today. I was so pleased to be there, and it turned out that Delia and Richard were also very pleased to be there once they got their head around the history. Thumbs up from Richard. We've got Delia and Richard to thank for some of these photos. We all had cameras, we were clicking away at every opportunity, and so some of them from each of us. We then drove back from Dayton to Chicago and on up to Oshkosh, about a 4-hour drive back to Chicago and a 3 or 4-hour drive up to Oshkosh. We got there on a Sunday afternoon and checked in, and the next morning, bright and early, we're out there, Richard, Delia and me, ready to get stuck into what was available to be seen. I had the idea that I might be able to see nearly everything, but I had to give that away in the end. You just can't see everything that's there. Some of the numbers are mind-bending, and I'll cover those in a few ticks. That's a layout of the aerodrome. There are 4 buildings where the red dots are, buildings A, B, C and D, and each of them would have displays of about 100 producers of aviation equipment. As well as that, there's thousands of other displays on the aerodrome. There were 4 main parking areas on the other side of the main north-south runway. Over on that side, there were warbirds, home-built, vintage, show planes, ultralights, helicopters, you name it, they were all there. Aircraft parking and camping up there. I'll show you a photo of what that's like later on. And there was also the museum, which had a free bus ride over to it, which is only within walking distance. But to get round to all of those and spend half a day in each of those areas really takes up somewhere near half your week. So half the time available is gone just getting around there. The organisation, the air traffic controllers, handle up to 300 aircraft an hour, and they land on the runway on coloured markers. And so, as you've probably heard a previous speaker from Peter, what's his name, who has flown in there a number of times, that you just don't answer radio calls, they tell you what to do. But the faster aircraft are at 2,300 feet and the slower aircraft 90 knots at 1,800 feet. They're the type of aircraft you can see, all sorts of aircraft. You name it, they're there. The attractions, joyrides, trade displays, flying displays, air shows, seaplane base. Something to do every moment of every day and night. The attendance was 540,000. They say there were 25,000 campers on the aerodrome. 4,000 plus volunteers were there to help. They didn't work all day, every day. Some of them came in for a day or two and did a little bit of help and then took off again. But there were over 700 commercial exhibitors showing their wares. That's the man who started it all, Paul Polarezny, got the show underway in 1953. And so he started what's now become the biggest air show in the world. People get around, you can hire golf buggies to get around, and the officials use them to get from place to place, and they also use little motorbikes, mini bikes and so on. Trams, free, take you from one end of the airport to the other, different colours, That one's got red flags on it, and it runs a regular route, but there are two other colours, green trams, yellow trams, red trams to cart you around. The arrivals start in the week before the event. 10,000 aircraft arrive, as I said, some of them at 300 aircraft per hour arriving. They have mass arrivals of Moody aircraft, mass arrivals of Bonanzas, Cessnas, etc. These clubs get themselves together, assemble at a nearby airport and then fly in en masse. That's the Beechcraft Bonanza team. They like getting together, and that was their official photograph. A lot of people camp under the wings of their aircraft. It was a bit of a worry because on Wednesday afternoon it rained, and the soil there was very muddy, and one of the parking areas had to be closed because of the slipperiness. The mud squeezes up on top of the grass under your feet and under the wheels of motor vehicles. The wheels just tend to spin. So they had a tough time on Wednesday and Thursday, but things got a little bit better towards the end of the week. Car parks, there were 5 car parks that were packed out like that every day, and camper vans, you've never seen anything like them. Home builts, 3/4 Spitfire, a really marvellous reproduction. A 3/4 Mustang with a turbine up the front, be a real power machine to fly. And home builts and kit builts all over the place. Rotorcraft weren't forgotten. Helicopters, I think that's a Eurocopter. Stuart Lawrence will be able to tell us whether it is or it isn't. And the Navy was there too. And the gyrocopters. Warbirds, Mustangs, a dozen or more Mustangs. When there was a Mustang here, I used to go outside to listen to it. Every time it started up, I'd go and say, wow, isn't that amazing? Over there, there's Mustangs coming and going all day. In the end, you don't even turn around and have a look at them. I didn't think it would ever happen to me. Warhawks, Kitty Hawks, Lightnings flying in displays, all of these in the air. Corsairs. That's not a real Focke-Wulf. It's put together, a fair bit of it's plastic, but it's a flyable machine and it looks very much like the real thing. Supermarine Seafire. Lovely DC-3. In fact, there was a lineup of DC-3s, half a dozen of them there. Beautiful to see. Mitchell's, that one stood out in particular because of its shininess, and that was the second one that was there. I think that was a Ventura. Yeah. Someone might be able to correct me. Harpoon. Thank you. And of course, one of the attractions was the B-29. Absolutely beautiful aircraft, restored to perfection. That's it in flight. The air show, well, you just never cease to be surprised at what you see in an air show over there. Mass flyovers, they seem to like those. Masses of aircraft overflying. So they may fly over the western side of the airfield while something else is taking place on the other side, maybe a display of some description. Mock attacks, boom boom, fire, smoke, all that sort of stuff. And that was a bit of a rarity. I'd not seen it before. Well, maybe I had. It lives in the museum there, and it was flying at the show, and quite a unique vehicle. I believe there's still 3 of them flying in the world, or 3 of them still in existence. And we had the Jelly Belly pilot landing on the top of the truck. he made it look rather difficult by getting part on and part off and making all sorts of noises about how difficult it was, but in the end he got on and it looked pretty simple in the end. This was something that took our fancy. It was a jet-powered glider, and so after taking off under jet power, just performed aerobatics throughout the afternoon. The Blue Angels were there. Sorry, only one Blue Angel was there, I think. I had the impression that the American government weren't putting as much money into Oshkosh as they had in the past. I think that tightened the purse strings a little bit. Ford Company, who are big supporters of Oshkosh, produced this Blue Angels Mustang, which looked very, very impressive. This bloke achieved 330 miles an hour on the strip. And so, low flying, yeah, just above the ground. And the wing walker, upside down in an ag wagon. And of course the Harrier was there, beautiful in flight. And I thought that was a pretty good idea, how to get some good photographs. Give your camera to someone, put them on your shoulders and get up there and take some photos without heads being in the way.
Everyone I asked wouldn't do that. What was her name?
And the National Air Guard ran off the end of the runway. We don't know why, no one's talking about it. But either the brakes failed or the throttle didn't come off, and in he went. A multi-million-dollar faux pas, I'd say. But it all turned out nice in the end, happy-faced. Aerobatics, well, people have taken aerobatics to the limit these days, such that everyone who does aerobatics does the same sort of thing. A few years ago, a person would stick his neck out and develop a new manoeuvre. But these days, everyone's flying the aeroplane to the absolute limit. Some of the manoeuvres they perform are just mind-bending, and you wonder why they want to do them. It would appear that they're trying to pull the aeroplane to pieces. This was a delight to watch, Beechcraft doing aerobatics, no more than 2.2 to 2.5 G, rolls, loops, stall turns, you name it, all under about 250, 300 feet. The Shell aerobatic team always put on a marvellous display, and that was an absolute gem of a display. These chaps flying heavy metal L-39s, we had one of them here in the collection down the road some years ago, put on a masterly display. Their station keeping was just out of this world. I thought it was as good as I've ever seen. Of course, the Red Bull chopper was there, upside down in the right way, doing all sorts of fancy manoeuvres. And there was a night aerobatic display. You don't see that very often. And of course, aircraft with showers of sparks and lights coming off them throughout the event. Quite a delight to see. Trade displays, you name it, anything to do with aeroplanes, it was there. Some attractions to wake people up. Workshops. You can probably learn how to do almost anything to do in aviation by going to one of the workshops. There was a tribute to Bob Hoover, who's getting on in years now, but he was there talking. Rob Liddell, who some of you know, was also there in his company. Rob and he are very good friends. That's the Old Yeller, the Mustang that he flew for many years in displays. The North American company was in trouble, and Bob Hoover decided that he would help the company out, and after he started his displays in the Mustang and the Shrike, sales went up 8 times. So he almost personally saved the company. There's a fly past of an F-86 Saberliner and the Shrike aircraft, which was the aircraft that Bob particularly flew to the limit in air displays throughout the United States. And of course, not him, but someone else did the typical display in the Shrike. Not that this bloke did, but Bob Hoover used to, at that stage when he was flying, say, "Wheels up for landing," because he's upside down. Poke the wheels up and then invert the aircraft and land it correctly. Bert Rutan recently announced his retirement, and so the Experimental Aircraft Association put on a tribute to him, and people with these aircraft had come from all over America to display them. All shapes and sizes. The one at the bottom there, I'm not quite sure what sort of prop clearance you'd have in that. You wouldn't want to come in too heavily in that, I don't think. And because of the engine being at the back, he wasn't very happy with the noise that it made, so he had to design propellers to make them sound all right. All of this added to the expense. There's an aircraft with 2 fuselages and 1 engine in the middle. I can't understand why you'd ever design anything like that. And there's another one with the canard up the front, joined on to the main plane, maybe for rigidity, I don't know why. And this is the most unusual aircraft I've ever seen. It's called the Boomerang. I was a bit slighted by that, being associated with Australia. But it's a twin. One engine is on the main fuselage and the other one is on a separate fuselage. Both wings have a forward sweep. That's why it's called the Boomerang. And you might see from that diagram there how the wings are forward swept. Each engine has a different horsepower. Each prop has a different diameter. Goodness only knows why you'd ever design anything like that. That's it in flight, the Boomerang. He also designed this with the Piper Company, and they withdrew it after a while. Beechcraft, sorry. He promised he wasn't going to heckle. Bizjets, any number of them there. This is only a few. The Honda Jet always grabs attention. I don't know how far it is developed, but it was certainly flying there. Flew in, flew around on a few occasions during the day, and flew out. It was the centenary of naval aviation. The first naval carrier landing and takeoff took place in 1911. And so the Navy was well represented, both by the Navy itself and by people who had restored aircraft. And that's the Curtis Pusher, a replica of the first American naval aircraft to land and take off. I heard the talk by the pilot. One pilot was talking, but there were 2 of them there who fly it. And this bloke said, "We toss to see who flies. The winner doesn't fly." So there we are, Texans, Hellcats, Trojans, Corsairs, Bearcats, and a Swordfish. I don't know where that popped up from, but it was a bit of a surprise to see one there.
That was the Canadians, Ron.
Was it? Right. The Brits would have been very happy to see that there. Vintage aircraft, they were there as well. The Ford Trimotors, with the 2 Ford Trimotors flying joyrides from dawn till dusk every day. Some of us are familiar with the Beech Stagger Wing. We had a talk about that about a year ago. There was a lovely model of that there. And of course the Stinson Reliant that Kevin Bailey's got, one of those was there as well. A Beech 18, a favourite of some people. very nice aircraft. And this one, Grumman Duck. You don't see many of these days. Miscellaneous from Canada, Quest Air. Canadians were well represented. They were the biggest in the international visitors. There was 2,000 people registered at the international tent. 340 or 50 of them were Canadians and 245 of them were Australians. We were the second most represented country. And there's the Cessna 162, the Skycatcher, the one that they hope to be using for their as their basic trainer. And we hope to get some of them here one day. Kids weren't forgotten. You could buy or travel around in those things, enjoy yourself if you were the right age. That was how we used to enjoy ourselves of an evening. It was me and Delia and Richard, and this is Harry O'Neill and his wife Pat. And we stayed with the same family at different houses, but with the same general family. And we went out for a meal every night. They say that $100 million goes into Oshkosh, a city about the same size as Bunbury. And if you're going to have a meal at night, you had to make up your mind very early and get out there to the restaurants, otherwise you're in a queue. We ended up in a queue a couple of times, but we also ended up leaving at a reasonable hour and getting in. But the food was so cheap, I couldn't get over. You know, one night I had a main course with trimmings for $7.95. I had half a chicken and a whole heap of other things. Prices that you wouldn't believe. I had to photograph that. I've left $13 a kilo here, and there they were at 48 cents a pound, which equates to about $1.06 a kilo. But Steve Rogers bettered me, because in Hawaii he discovered them at 33 cents a pound. Ultralights, all sorts of ultralight aircraft there. Seaplane base, a delight, an absolute little treasure to go there and see the aircraft in this little protected area. Half a day there was half a day well spent. The future, well, there was a solar powered aircraft there. Didn't see it fly, but they tell me it has. And there's an electric aircraft there as well. High density propellers on aircraft, they're becoming fairly common these days. But one of the highlights was the Boeing 787. A marvellous looking aeroplane, and it was a delight to see. Very quiet in its operation. Rolls-Royce engines in that one. They have a choice, either Rolls-Royce or General Electric engines. That's the engine from the back, and you can almost see through some of that. So it's a high bypass engine, and the frilly edge on the back end of the engine there is to counteract noise. That's it in reverse thrust. You can see that halfway down the engine it's opened up for the reverse thrust to take place. That's the cockpit. None of us got inside. Harry O'Neill got within about 10 in the queue when they cut it off, so he missed out. He spent an hour in the queue and then missed out. That's what it looks like before it's painted, and that's the composite material. And so the entire fuselage is pretty much composite. The wings are aluminium and metal. That's the interior. Looks very nice, but economy class looks very much the same. Doesn't matter which aircraft you're in. And that's it on departure from Oshkosh, and I was particularly impressed by the lack of noise as it sailed away. So there we go. How are we set for time? Just a couple of things I'd like to mention. While I was having a look at the Airbus, sorry, not the Airbus, I was having a look at the 787. I got stuck into and had a look at the 747, the new model that Boeing are producing. So quite separate to Oshkosh and my trip to America. This is something I've obtained from the internet. It's the 747-8. It's a new aircraft, first rolled out last year, and the later model was rolled out at the beginning of this year. That's the freighter version where they haven't extended the upper deck, but they've put 30 feet into the fuselage, which makes it longer than the Airbus A380. That's it in flight. It made its maiden flight in 2010. That's the I model, the 747-8I, meaning intercontinental. And you'll note there that it's got an extended upper deck. So as well as having the extra 30 feet plugged into the fuselage, it's got the extended upper deck, and it carries around about 470 people against 550 in the Airbus. So it's Boeing's answer to the Airbus A380. If you look carefully at these photos, you'll see that it has the same engines as the 787. So rather than having different engine types for different aircraft, it's all the same. So there's a benefit there. The cockpit layout is exactly the same as the 787. So the two aircraft, which are going to be the lead sales in Boeing in coming years, are very much the same from an engine and a cockpit point of view.
Is that a dimple in the front, or is that a shading in the paintwork?
I think it's a shading in the paintwork. I don't think it's a bulge or a dimple there. I've had to enhance these photos. They came out in a funny sort of way, and maybe that's got a bit of me in it. I would think that if we went back a little further, you wouldn't see it in the fuselage of the other ones. So that's probably not realistic. Okay, and that's the main spar, 111 feet long. There's a comparison there, the numbers I was talking about. The 747-8 carries about 470 people against 550. But doesn't carry as much fuel, travels almost the same distance when it's packed with fuel, and they cruise at the same surface ceiling. So that's a comparison of their cockpit, of their cabins. The 747 is a bit narrower at the top, and that makes the difference in the seating capacity of them. But I think we'll probably find that there'll be some of those on the line in a few years' time. Okay, so that was it. Thank you for your attention.